Hello there! How feasible artificial general intelligence creation is? Let's talk about that. And I want to break this topic into two parts. The first one, assuming that we know how intelligence works, are we technologically advanced enough to create it? Do we have all tools in our toolbox? We will review different scenarios and possible solutions in this video. And the second part covering the question how. How we can approach the solution itself, derive the knowledge of how consciousness works. And this will be covered in the next video. Consider to subscribe so you won't miss it. Okay, let's pretend for a moment that we already have a blueprints of natural intelligence in our hands. And now we need only to assemble the machine which mimics that. Can we do that today? The first and most probable scenario, our brain contains consciousness and we can emulate neurons digitally. It was mentioned in Moore's law. The number of transistors getting close to 50 billions in one chip. This is crazy. It's the same order of magnitude as the number of neurons in our brain. Of course, neuron is more complex than one transistor, but transistor is faster and we can throw in as many chips as we want to match our brain. And as a matter of fact, if I know exactly what type of computations we need, we can build application-specific integrated circuit, ASIC. And the great example of such case is Bitcoin. To mine more Bitcoins, different groups of people created different versions of ASICs, and currently Bitcoin network processes around 1.2 times 10 in 20th power hashes per second. Let's assume that complexity of computing one hash is roughly equal to complexity of one tact of neuron state calculation. The speed of neuron is around 1000 ticks per second, and we have around 80 billion neurons in human brain. Let's divide Bitcoin capacity by 80 billions and by 1000 ticks per second. This will give us 1.5 million brains capacity. And we should keep in mind that one neuron has around 10,000 synapse connections with neighbors. Let's divide 1.5 million by 10,000 and we will get around 150 brains. Keep in mind that it's very conservative approximation though. Not all neurons spikes all the time. And synapses itself require less operations to process than one hash calculation do. So given all of that, it's safe to assume that as a civilization we already built a system which can process thousands of human-level brains in real time and in parallel. This means that we can build specialized devices, ASICs, and grow the whole network capacity to require scale in just a few years. It worth noting that Bitcoin technology was created presumably by one person. It's a very rare thing these days, and since we are advanced enough as a civilization, we have what we have today. What about the near future? Maybe it's better to wait a bit. Moore's law will be on our side. We can prepare better for the dawn of the AI. This topic is actually covered in this video, 5 reasons to build artificial general intelligence as soon as possible. Second scenario, our brain contains our consciousness, but we need analog devices to emulate it. This scenario is similar to the first one, but digital emulation is too slow for various reasons. For example, it's okay to have some errors, but maybe we need a wider range of values than floating point can provide, something like this. Basically, it can be solved with ASICs from the first scenario, so there is not much difference here, except that ASICs should be analogous and development becomes a bit harder, especially if you want to tune some parameters using genetic algorithms and natural selection. Third scenario, our brain contains consciousness, but neurons are too complex. For example, neurons use quantum effects or can encode and decode various outputs for different input patterns in RNA, and thus there is not enough computational power to support consciousness and intellect with ASICs. There are several possible ways how we can approach this problem. In the worst case, we can grow neurons and put it in the chips. One cortical mini-column has around 100 neurons. Cortical mini-column is a formation of neurons in our cerebral cortex that can detect one specific pattern in portion of sensory input. This means that we have around 800 million cortical mini-columns in our brain at most. Wikipedia gives around 100 million, which should be more accurate taking into account that the cerebral cortex is only the part of the brain. If we have to put one mini-column per chip, it gives 100 million chips for one brain. We can do that. On the other hand, 50 to 100 mini-columns form one cortical column. It's a functional unit of information processing. Such column can process a whole variety of patterns from portion of sensory input which map to the specific column. This means that we have from 1 to 2 million columns in our cerebral cortex. And if we can put the whole column in the chip, it's 1 million chips, it's one data center. By the way, we should be able to hot swap individual chips without much effect on the whole semi-artificial brain. In this case, the whole brain becomes immortal even having mortal cells. Fourth scenario. Our brain doesn't contain consciousness. The least probable scenario, but let's talk about that too. Well, what could it be? For example, we are in the matrix and a brain is sort of the transmitter. Our brain connects the soul and the body. I hope the third scenario can cover this one too, but for now let's assume that this fourth scenario is not our case, because if it's the case, then building true AI has not much meaning. Maybe I forgot some other scenarios, please let me know in the comments below. I personally hope that our scenario is the first and easiest one. At least it doesn't look like we use quantum effects to support our consciousness in our brain. Otherwise we would be in orders of magnitude smarter than we currently are. Since we don't have blueprints of intelligence, we'll have to draw it by ourselves, and in the next video let's talk about that. How we can approach the understanding of what the intellect and consciousness are. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, feel free to give it a like, please consider to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next videos. Bye!